Let's dive into something that, well, it touches all of our lives, something we talk about constantly but often struggle to define: intelligence. What does it actually mean to be smart?
Yeah, it's one of those things.
We've got a fascinating source here that takes us on a journey through the major psychological theories and even the history of trying to put a number on intelligence.
Right.
Our mission today is to cut through the complexity, and give you a clear picture of how experts have grappled with this fundamental question, drawing straight from this material.
And it's a concept that feels so intuitive, doesn't it? Yet, as this source highlights right from the start, getting psychologists to actually agree on a single standard definition of intelligence has been surprisingly elusive.
Really? Even after all this time?
Even after decades of study, yeah. That really sets the stage for why this topic is so, well, complex.
It's counterintuitive, isn't it? You'd think with all the focus on cognitive science, we'd have the definition nailed down by now.
You really would.
So, if there's no one agreed upon definition, what are the common threads? What do most experts seem to agree intelligence involves?
Well, the source points out that while the specific definitions vary, there's broad agreement on the core components.
Okay.
Intelligence involves key mental abilities like logic, reasoning, problem solving, and planning. Think of the fundamental tools your mind uses.
The building blocks, essentially, like the
Yes,
basics.
exactly. And beyond just those mental tools, the definition consistently includes the ability to learn from experience.
Oh, right.
That acquiring new knowledge, retaining it, and critically knowing how and when to use it.
So it's not just about having the information stuffed in your head, but
Yeah.
being able to, pull it out and apply it.
Precisely. The ability to recognize when a problem arises and then effectively using that learned knowledge to solve it. Learning, recognizing problems, solving them, those are recurring themes.
Right.
You see them woven into most attempts to define intelligence.
And why does all this matter? I mean, this isn't just an academic debate tucked away in a university, is it? The source touches on the real-world implications.
Oh, definitely not. It has significant societal impact. How we understand and measure intelligence influences crucial areas, like educational funding decisions,
Big one.
how companies screen job applicants, and how we identify and support children who might need extra help in school. The definition isn't just theoretical. It shapes policies. It affects individual opportunities. Big time.
It's a powerful idea with very practical consequences. Okay, so since pinning down one definition has been so tough, psychologists have approached the problem from many different angles, right? Proposing various theories about what intelligence actually is.
Yeah, exactly. The source guides us through some of the most influential ones developed over the last century or so.
So where should we start? What's maybe the earliest big idea?
Yes, we can probably start with one of the earliest and most influential ideas, the notion that intelligence is fundamentally a single general ability.
Okay, this brings us to Charles Spearman and his famous G factor. How did Spearman arrive at this conclusion that intelligence could be boiled down to essentially one underlying thing?
Spearman was a British psychologist, and he was using a technique called factor analysis. He looked at results from lots of different mental aptitude tests.
Factor analysis, breaking things down statistically.
Kinda, yeah, finding underlying patterns. And he noticed a really consistent pattern. People who scored high on one type of cognitive test, say, vocabulary, tended to score high on others too, like spatial reasoning or mathematical problems.
Interesting. So almost like there's a common engine driving performance across all these different tasks.
Exactly. That was his interpretation. This led him to hypothesize the existence of a single underlying general cognitive ability that influenced performance on all specific mental tasks.
And that's the G factor.
That's the G factor, or general intelligence. The core insight here is the pretty radical idea for the time that despite the many ways we seem smart, maybe it's all powered by one fundamental capacity.
Which he thought could be measured.
Which he believed could be measured as a single numerical ability. Yeah.
That's a powerful, simplifying idea.
Yeah.
But, it didn't convince everyone, right? If intelligence is one big mental muscle, how do you explain someone who's brilliant with words, but completely lost when trying to fix something physical, or vice versa?
That's precisely the kind of question that led to alternative views. Louis L. Thurston, for example, he challenged Spearman's single factor directly.
Okay.
He argued that intelligence wasn't one general thing, but rather a combination of distinct abilities, more like a toolkit than a single engine.
Right. Okay, that makes sense too. He broke it down into what he called primary mental abilities. The source lists 7 of them. What were those distinct skills according to Thurstone?
Thurstone identified 7 specific abilities. There's associative memory, basically how well you memorize and recall information.
Got it.
Numerical ability, pretty straightforward. Skill in solving math problems. Perceptual speed, that's how quickly you can spot differences and similarities between things. Reasoning, the capacity to find rules or patterns in information. Spatial visualization, being able to mentally picture and manipulate objects or relationships in space.
Like imagining how furniture fits in a room.
Exactly. Then, verbal comprehension, understanding and defining words. And finally, word fluency, the ability to produce words rapidly, like thinking of words that start with B really quickly.
So instead of one overall score, Thurston would say you have separate strengths, potentially, in each of these areas. That feels a bit more intuitive when you think about people you know, right? People excel in some mental tasks, but maybe not others.
It does align more with how we often perceive abilities. It's a definite shift towards seeing intelligence as multifaceted.
Okay, so the idea of intelligence being more complex than just G starts taking hold.
And that multifaceted view is taken even further by Howard Gardner. His theory really pushed the boundaries of what people had traditionally even considered intelligence.
Ah, Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. This was probably one of the most widely known today, isn't it?
Very influential, yeah, especially in education.
His central idea was that traditional IQ tests, focused mainly on verbal and logical skills, just don't capture the full range of human capabilities valued in different cultures. Is that
right? He argued that being smart isn't just about being good at school subjects like math and English. Gardner proposed 8 different types of intelligence, each representing a different area of potential and skill.
8 distinct ways of being smart. Okay, let's run through them. What are they?
Okay, so we have bodily kinesthetic intelligence, skill in controlling your body for physical activities. Think dancers, athletes, surgeons, maybe?
Physical intelligence.
Interpersonal intelligence, that's understanding and interacting effectively with other people. Social skills, empathy.
People smarts.
Kind of, yeah. Then intrapersonal intelligence, self-awareness, understanding your own emotions, motivations, your inner world.
Knowing yourself.
Logical, mathematical, and this is more traditional, the ability to think abstractly, reason logically, see numerical patterns. Musical intelligence, sensitivity to rhythm, pitch, melody, harmony.
Musical talent as intelligence. Interesting.
Yeah. Naturalistic intelligence, the ability to recognize, classify, and understand things in the natural world, like a biologist or maybe a chef, understanding ingredients.
Connection to nature, patterns there.
Verbal linguistic skill with language, reading, writing, speaking, again, more traditional.
Yeah.
And finally, visual spatial intelligence, thinking in images, visualizing, understanding spatial relationships, like an architect or a navigator.
Wow. That list is so much broader than what we usually think of as intelligence. It includes things like being a great leader, which needs that interpersonal skill, or a talented musician.
Exactly.
What Gardner really forces us to confront is that our traditional metrics, like school grades or standard IQ tests, might only be assessing a small slice of what makes someone capable and successful in the real world.
Absolutely. It challenges the conventional view significantly. The source does note, though, that there's still debate. Some critics, like Robert Sternberg, view some of Gardner's intelligences as more akin to specific talents rather than core intelligences.
Ah, so the debate continues even among those who favor a broader definition.
Always. Which brings us nicely to Sternberg.
Speaking of Sternberg, he offered another really influential perspective, focusing specifically on intelligence in the context of, real-world success.
Yes, Sternberg's definition, as noted in the source, is quite revealing. Mental activity directed toward purposive adaptation to, selection, and shaping of real-world environments relevant to one's life.
That sounds very practical.
It is. His focus is very much on how intelligence functions in the world.
So it's not just about abstract thinking in a vacuum, but about how you use your mind to navigate and succeed in your actual life, your environment. What are the components of his approach? So the triarchic theory, right? 3 parts.
That's right. Sternberg proposed that successful intelligence involves 3 factors. First, there's analytical intelligence. This is the ability to evaluate information, analyze problems, solve them, basically what many people associate with traditional academic smarts or book smarts.
Okay, that sounds familiar. It aligns somewhat with the logical and reasoning abilities we started with.
Yeah.
Spearman's G, maybe?
Yeah.
What are the other 2 that make his theory distinct?
Second is creative intelligence. This is the ability to come up with novel ideas, new solutions, different approaches. It's about thinking outside the box, innovation.
Right, the inventive side.
And third is practical intelligence. This is the ability to apply knowledge and skills effectively in everyday situations, adapting to your environment, problem solving on the fly, often referred to as street smarts or common sense.
Analytical, creative, practical. I like how that frames intelligence. Not just the capacity to learn or solve abstract problems, but also the ability to innovate and navigate complex, messy, real-world situations. That practical side feels particularly relevant to daily life. So Sternberg, like Gardner and Thurstone before him, moves decisively beyond the single G factor. But he organizes these broader skills differently, focusing on how they help you succeed.
Yes, it's a really powerful framework for thinking about how intelligence manifests functionally in different ways. Now, the source also delves into a slightly different angle: how intelligence might change over a person's lifetime.
Okay. This is the distinction between fluid and crystallized intelligence, proposed by Raymond Cattell and later expanded by John Horn. What's the difference between those two?
So fluid intelligence is your ability to reason abstractly, solve new problems, and use logic in novel situations without necessarily relying on prior knowledge you've accumulated.
Okay, like pure processing power.
Kind of, yeah. Think of it as your capacity for flexible thinking, seeing patterns, processing new information on the fly, like tackling a puzzle you've never seen before, or figuring out a new piece of software with minimal instructions.
Right. And how does that change over time?
Well, the theory suggests that fluid intelligence tends to peak in young adulthood and then may gradually decline with age.
Okay, what about the other one? Crystallized.
Crystallized intelligence, on the other hand, is based on the knowledge, skills, and experience you've accumulated over your lifetime. It's your store of concrete facts, vocabulary, cultural knowledge, established procedures.
So, like knowing historical dates, having a huge vocabulary, or understanding complex instructions based on past experience, that's crystallized.
Exactly right. And crystallized intelligence generally continues to increase throughout adulthood, or at least hold steady for much longer. It builds over time.
Interesting. So one might decline slightly while the other keeps growing.
That's the general idea. It's fascinating, too, that the source mentions some research suggesting certain aspects of fluid intelligence might actually peak a bit later than traditionally thought, maybe even around age 40 for some skills.
That is good news. Okay, so we have these different types across the lifespan. And finally, before we talk about trying to actually measure all of this complex stuff, there's the concept of emotional intelligence. That's gained a lot of traction recently.
Yes, EQ. Often associated with Daniel Goleman's work, though the roots go back further, emotional intelligence is basically the ability to perceive, understand, control, and evaluate emotions, both your own and those of others.
So understanding feelings.
And using that emotional information effectively, using it to guide your thinking and behavior, and to manage interactions with other people successfully.
The source lists some characteristics often associated with high EQ. What are those?
They include things like having strong self-awareness, knowing your own emotional state, being empathetic, understanding, and responding to others' feelings, having the flexibility to embrace change, and being skilled at managing your own emotions, particularly in difficult or stressful situations.
That sounds incredibly useful in life.
Yeah.
Is it something you're born with or learn?
That's part of the ongoing discussion. There's debate about whether EQ is more innate or primarily learned and developed, and also about how accurately it can be measured. Often it's through self-report questionnaires or specific ability tests, but those have their own challenges.
Okay, so we've journeyed from seeing intelligence as potentially one core thing to maybe 7 primary abilities, to 8 or more multiple intelligences, to a practical triarchic model, to types that change with age, and now even the crucial role of understanding emotions. It's really clear why there isn't one simple definition everyone agrees on.
It's a rich and complex tapestry of ideas, isn't it? And given all these different theoretical perspectives, the historical attempt to actually measure intelligence, to put a single number on it, well, that has its own compelling story.
Right. The famous IQ test, let's get into that. The term intelligence quotient, or IQ, was coined by William Stern early in the 20th century.
Correct. But the effort to measure intelligence practically really kicked off a bit earlier. The very first practical intelligence tests were developed by Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon in Paris back in 1905.
And this wasn't just for academic curiosity, was it? It was for a very specific practical purpose.
Exactly. The French government asked them to find a way to identify school children who might struggle academically and need extra support in school. A very practical need.
Okay, so how did they approach that?
That practical goal led Binet to develop the concept of mental age. He created a series of tasks that children of different chronological ages could typically complete successfully.
So tasks for a typical 6-year-old, a typical 7-year-old, and so on.
Precisely. If a child passed the tasks designed for a typical 10-year-old, regardless of their actual physical age, Binet said they had a mental age of 10.
Ah, I see. So a bright 7-year-old who could do the 10-year-old tasks had a mental age higher than their chronological age. That's a clever way to capture developmental differences in ability at the time.
It was a foundational concept. This idea was later adapted by Louis Terman at Stanford University in the U.S., which led to the famous Stanford-Binet IQ test.
And that's where the original scoring method came from, the formula.
Yes, its original scoring method was that well-known formula: mental age divided by chronological age multiplied by 100. This gave you a ratio IQ score.
Which, as the source notes, isn't typically how modern IQ tests are scored anymore, right? The approach evolved quite significantly.
Yes, absolutely. A major step forward was David Wechsler's development of the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, or WAIS, in 1939.
WAIS. Okay, what was groundbreaking about that?
Well, first, it was the first widely used intelligence test designed specifically for adults, not just adapted from children's tests. That was huge.
Right, testing grown-ups.
And second, it introduced the scoring method we mostly use today, based on where your score falls on the bell curve compared to others in your specific age group. It uses a standardized normal distribution.
The bell curve, so your score shows how you compare to your peers.
Correct. Instead of a ratio comparing mental to chronological age, your score reflects your standing relative to a large representative sample group of people your age. The average is set at 100.
And the WAIS is still commonly used.
Very much so. It's one of the most common intelligence tests today, and it also provides scores for different cognitive areas like verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, working memory, processing speed, giving a more nuanced picture than just a single overall IQ number.
That makes sense. The source also mentions a few other standardized tests psychologists might use today, like the Woodcock-Johnson or the Kaufman Assessment Battery.
Right. There's a range of well-established tools available, used to assess cognitive abilities depending on the specific clinical or educational need.
And the source gives us some context for understanding those scores too, right? Like the average is 100.
Yes, average is around 100. And scores typically in the 55 to 70 range are often associated with mild intellectual disabilities in the majority of cases, with lower scores indicating more significant support needs. So these numbers, debated as they are, do have real clinical and educational relevance.
They do have consequences.
They absolutely do. However, and this is a big however, as the source makes very clear, despite this long history and the widespread use of testing, IQ testing remains a subject of considerable debate and scrutiny.
Yeah, you hear about that all the time. And it feels like the debate about the test loops right back to those fundamental questions about what intelligence is in the first place.
It's almost circular in a way, isn't it? The source highlights the inherent difficulty. It's the human mind trying to study and measure itself.
Meta.
Very meta. Researchers bring their own perspectives, their cultural backgrounds, their biases inevitably into the process. Plus, you're trying to build objective tests for a trait that, as we've just spent all this time discussing, has many conflicting theoretical definitions.
Right.
There's no single universally agreed upon blueprint for intelligence itself, let alone a perfect way to quantify it.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
How can you perfectly measure something when you can't even agree on exactly what it is you're measuring? The source lists some key unanswered questions that keep this debate lively among psychologists today.
Yeah, really fundamental questions like, are intelligence tests inherently biased? Do they perhaps favor certain cultural backgrounds or ways of thinking over others?
A huge concern.
Definitely. Also, is intelligence truly best understood as a single overarching ability, that G factor, or is it fundamentally multiple distinct skills like Thurstone or Gardner suggested?
Nature versus nurture too.
Big time. To what extent is intelligence determined by genetics, what you inherit, versus shaped by environmental factors like education, nutrition, socioeconomic status, upbringing? That's a massive area of research.
And maybe the biggest question of all.
What do intelligence scores actually predict? What do they tell us about a person's potential success or capabilities in the real world, beyond just doing well on the test itself?
Those are huge, complex questions that are still driving research and debate.
Absolutely. The source really underscores that this isn't a settled issue by any means. Psychologists today often have to consider and even integrate aspects from multiple theoretical viewpoints. They have to acknowledge the complexity and the lack of a single definitive standard or measurement.
Okay, so after covering all these different definitions, theories, the whole history of testing,
Yeah.
why does grappling with all this matter to, the listener? How does this deep dive connect back to everyday life?
Well, I think understanding these different perspectives can fundamentally change how you view your own strengths and weaknesses, maybe. And also how you perceive the abilities of other people.
Oh, so?
Maybe you've always felt like you weren't traditionally book smart, for instance, but you're great at navigating social situations, or you can fix anything around the house, or you're always the one coming up with creative solutions at work.
Yeah.
Looking at theories like Gardner's multiple intelligences or Sternberg's triarchic theory offers ways to see those skills as valid forms of intelligence, rather than just, separate hobbies or talents unrelated to being smart.
It expands the picture beyond just the score you might have gotten on some standardized test back in school, gives you a richer vocabulary for your own skills.
Exactly. And knowing the history and the ongoing debate around IQ testing helps you critically assess situations where intelligence is being measured or discussed.
Like where?
Whether it's in an educational setting looking at school placements, or maybe applying for a job where they use cognitive tests, or even in medical or behavioral evaluations sometimes, it helps you question what's really being measured and whether that measurement truly captures the full picture of someone's capabilities.
It gives you a framework, maybe, to appreciate the incredible diversity of human minds and abilities, rather than trying to rank everyone on a single scale.
Yes. It shifts the focus from a potentially limiting single number to a much richer, more nuanced understanding of what it means to be intelligent in all its forms.
So, circling back to where we began this deep dive, it's really clear that intelligence isn't some simple, easily defined trait we figured out.
Not at all.
Instead, it's this dynamic, heavily debated landscape explored through all these diverse theories, from the idea of a single general factor, all the way to multiple specific abilities and practical real-world skills.
And psychologists are still actively wrestling with those fundamental questions about what it is and how, or even if, we can truly measure it adequately.
The source material itself really leaves us with those compelling, unresolved points, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Reminding us how much there is still to explore and understand about our own minds.
It really does. It's an ongoing journey.
Indeed. So here's maybe a provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider, drawn directly from the heart of this ongoing debate we've just explored. Given all the different theories out there and all the challenges and controversies surrounding measurement, what do you personally believe is the most important aspect of intelligence in the real world? And thinking about it, do you think something that complex can truly be captured and quantified by a single number, like an IQ score?
Definitely something to ponder.
Absolutely. Lots to think about there. Until next time.